Everyone is hard for the new Guilds of Ravnica spoilers, but as we all know, very few cards from a new set will actually impact the modern metagame. So let's discuss which cards have real potential in modern. So to start things off in no particular order, we have Deafening Clarion. Deafening Clarion says deal 3 damage to each creature, and then you can give your creatures lifelink. We already have a couple of board wipe cards like this in modern, with Anger of the Gods being the most relevant one, and it is rather difficult to top Anger of the Gods with its exile ability. But if our creatures can survive the board wipe and then gain lifelink, then that's pretty good. And while life gain itself isn't inherently a priority in modern, incidental life gain on the other hand is very, very good. The problem is that a lot of white-red decks in modern tend to run a lot of little creatures in them, so most white-red decks will pass on this card. But there is one deck out there that I think this card will really benefit, and that is White-Red Prison with Gideons. Because Gideon can turn into an indestructible creature, it'll be able to survive the board wipe, gain lifelink, and our opponent coming back from a board wipe and some life gain, that would be no easy feat. So I'm going to rate this card 3 out of 5 surprises. Very much looking forward to playing with this card. Next up, we have a very unique Nullhide Ferox. It's a 6/6 for 4. Hexproof comes into play when your opponent discards it, but it says you can't cast non-creature spells. And on top of that, to make this card even more bizarre, it says pay 2, Nullhide Ferox loses all abilities until end of turn, and any player may activate this ability. So in other words, we can pay 2 to play creature spells that turn, and our opponent can pay 2 to get rid of Hexproof for the turn. Alone, this card isn't too good, but we can exploit it with a few cards out there. We could put it in a deck with Suppression Field, making all activated abilities cost 2 more, or we could shut off Ferox's activated ability altogether with Pithing Needle, Phyrexian Revoker, Sorcerer's Spyglass, and Damping Matrix. But because this card needs a deck tailored just for it, I'm only going to give this one surprise out of 5. I'll still make a deck around it though, because it is pretty cool. Next up is Raska, Golgari Queen. When evaluating how good a Planeswalker is, everyone will tell you that the first thing you look for is, does this card interact with your opponent immediately? And in this case, yes, Raska does. Its minus ability says destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. So it does in fact meet that criteria. But everything else about this card isn't all that great. Its +2 ability says you may sacrifice another permanent. If you do, you gain 1 life and you draw a card. The trouble is, I can't think of a deck where we'd want to sacrifice a permanent on turn 4, and when we compare Raska to similar Planeswalkers that are successful, we can see that they all have much better plus abilities. Nahiri's plus ability is somewhat similar in that we have to discard a card to draw a card, but discarding a card is much more convenient than sacrificing a permanent, especially if that permanent is a card that we paid to play. And on top of all of this, its ultimate isn't anything special. A deck may emerge in the future where we want to sacrifice permanents, in which case Raska could be good in that deck, but until then, I can only give this one 2 surprises out of 5. Maybe one day it will be good. The next card is Knight of Autism. It is not offensive if I say it because it is my people's word. So Knight of Autism says when Knight of Autism enters the battlefield, choose 1, put 2 1/1 counters on Knight of Autism, or destroy target artifact or enchantment, or you gain 4 life. There are so many things we have to sideboard against nowadays that having a card that can do all this all in one is very, very convenient. And even in situations where we don't need the artifact hate, or we don't need the enchantment hate, or we don't need to gain 4 life because our opponent's not aggro, at the very least, it is a 4/3, and that's not all that bad. So I'm giving Knight of Autism a solid 4 surprises out of 5. It might even be good enough to see some main deck play. The next card is a card that a lot of people are excited about, and that is Assassin's Trophy. And when I first saw this card, I was like, dang, it looks like someone took a dump in that head's mouth. And then I was like, dang, its ability is not bad either. For 2 mana, we destroy target permanent an opponent controls, and they search the deck for a basic land card and they play it. The reason why people are so excited for this card is that it says any permanent, not just non-land permanents, meaning that the Tron lands are fair game with this card. There's no doubt that this card will be played in modern. The question is, how deep of an impact will this have on the modern metagame? And the bigger question is, what effect will this have in Jund and Abzan decks? And on that topic, it's no secret that both Jund and Abzan decks have been hurting a bit in the past year or so. Don't get me wrong, both decks are still viable in the metagame, but it's just not to the extent that it was just a few years back. And I think a lot of people like to point the finger at Tron for the decline, but I think in reality, the decline has more to do with 2 reasons. The first one being a faster metagame, with decks like Death Shadow and Hollow One, and even Vengevine now. And the second reason for the decline was the printing of Fatal Push. Before the printing of Fatal Push, it seemed like the main threat in modern was Lightning Bolt. And all the threats in both Jund and Abzan happen to deal with Lightning Bolt very, very easily. But now with Fatal Push, all these threats are vulnerable, and even 18 months after being printed, Fatal Push is still the 4th most played black card in modern. So will the printing of Assassin's Trophy fix all these problems for Jund and Abzan? I doubt it. Will we see some cool stuff with Assassin's Trophy? Yeah, I think so. One thing I really want to see is an Abzan deck with 4 Path to Exiles and 4 Assassin's Trophies. With most modern decks only running a few basics, there is a very high chance that our opponent will run out of basics before the game's over. Taking that into consideration, I'm going to give this one 4 surprises out of 5. Definitely going to see some main deck play. The last card for today is Mission Briefing. It says for 2 blue mana, Surveil 2, which is basically Scry 2, but the cards go into the graveyard instead of the bottom of the library. Followed by that, it says choose an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn and then exile it. A lot of people are really excited for this card because it rivals Snapcaster Mage. It's very similar to Snapcaster Mage and even has 2 advantages, one being the Surveil 2, and the second is that you don't choose the card in the graveyard to cast until the spell has resolved, which means that unlike Snapcaster, your opponent can't just target the card that you're targeting in graveyard and then remove it. They have to do it before the spell resolves, before you pick the card. So in that sense, Mission Briefing is better than Snapcaster, but in a control deck like Jeskai Control, I still think having Snapcaster is better because there's a lot of situations where having a 2-1 body out can win you the game. So I think the real question this card brings up is if we could have 8 Snapcasters in a deck, would we put 8 Snapcasters in a deck? Because the issue is that both Snapcaster and this card don't really cost 2. They cost 3 to 6 depending on what we're casting from graveyard. So I'm not entirely sure if the curve of a control deck can handle 4 Snapcasters and 4 of these. It might though. And because of that, I'm going to rate this card 4.5 surprises out of 5. It's pretty rare for a new card to rival a modern staple, so I think the excitement for this card is very well deserved. But that is all for now. Let me know in the comments what you agreed with, what you disagreed with, because I do in fact read every comment. There will be a lot of modern videos for Guilds of Ravnica, so if you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell thingamabob. But that is all, and as always, I hope you have a great day.